Hey everyone, and welcome to War Chronicles 1940. Today we're doing something pretty ambitious. We are going to try and cover the entire Second World War, all 6 years of it, in just a few minutes. So let's dive right in. And that really is the big question, isn't it? How on earth did one conflict manage to swallow the entire globe in just 6 years? I mean, it's just mind-boggling. Let's try and unpack how it all happened. All right, let's get into it. So, where do we start? Well, the fuse was really lit back in 1939. One single invasion set the world on a path to war. And here it is, September 1939. Nazi Germany invades Poland. This was it. Hitler's forces just poured across the border. And honestly, the world could only watch as Poland was just completely overrun. This was the move that finally kicked off a much wider war in Europe. And how did they do it so fast with this terrifying new style of warfare they called blitzkrieg? I mean, the name says it all, right? Lightning war. The whole idea was to hit the enemy with overwhelming force, just total shock and awe. You've got planes, you've got tanks, all moving at incredible speed to just punch a hole right through the lines and create chaos. It was devastating. So Britain and France, they see this and they declare war. But then, nothing. Well, not exactly nothing. It was this really weird, tense period that people started calling the phony war. But that quiet, it didn't last. In 1940, the German war machine just roared to life, steamrolling through Denmark, Norway, Belgium, the Netherlands, and then France. It was a total shock. The British Army got trapped, leading to that incredible, desperate evacuation from the beaches of Dunkirk. So now, just picture it. Almost all of Europe is under Nazi control. Britain is completely alone. Germany's Air Force, the Luftwaffe, starts hammering the country day and night. They're trying to wipe out the Royal Air Force to clear the way for an invasion. But, against all odds, the RAF fought them off in what we now call the Battle of Britain. It was an absolutely crucial victory. Okay, so the war in Europe is already a catastrophe, but 1941 is when things go from being a massive European war to a truly global conflict. Two huge things happen that change everything. First, in June of 41, Hitler makes a massive gamble. He breaks his deal with Stalin and invades Russia. This was Operation Barbarossa, and it opened up the absolutely brutal Eastern Front. Then, just a few months later, in December, Japan attacks the U.S. naval base at Pearl Harbor. And that, right there, was the event that pulled the United States with all its industrial power straight into the war. Now, it was a world war for sure. So now the sides are clearly defined. You've got two major teams locked in this massive global fight. On one side, you have the Axis powers, Germany, Italy, and Japan. And facing them are the main Allied powers, Great Britain, the Soviet Union, and now the USA. And you know, while all this fighting was going on, something truly horrifying was being put into motion. In 1942, the Nazis formally implemented what they called the Final Solution. This was their systematic, state-sponsored plan to exterminate all of Europe's Jewish people. It was a monstrous plan for genocide that we now know as the Holocaust. Up to this point, honestly, it really seemed like the Axis powers were unstoppable. But then, starting around the middle of 1942, things started to change. This is the moment the tide begins to turn. A few key battles completely shifted the momentum of the entire war. It really comes down to three decisive battles. First, out in the Pacific, you have the Battle of Midway, where the U.S. Navy dealt a crippling blow to the Japanese fleet. Then in Egypt, the British wanted El Alamein, and that started the long push to get the Axis out of Africa. And finally, Stalingrad. The Germans surrendered there after one of the most brutal sieges in history was a complete catastrophe for them. They just never recovered from that loss. So with the momentum completely flipped, it's now the Allies on the attack. This is the final act. They start this long, incredibly difficult push towards victory, squeezing the Axis powers from every direction. And the beginning of the end in Europe, you probably know the date, June 6th, 1944. D-Day. The Allies hit the beaches in Normandy, France, in the biggest seaborne invasion ever. So now Germany is being squeezed. You've got the Allies pushing from the west, and at the same time, the huge Soviet Red Army is just relentlessly advancing from the east. It was the Soviets who actually got to the German capital of Berlin first. And that was pretty much it. They were surrounded, their capital was falling, the Nazi regime just crumbled. Germany officially surrendered in May of 1945, right after Adolf Hitler committed suicide.
Okay, so Europe is celebrating VE Day, victory in Europe. But the war wasn't over, not yet. The fight against Japan in the Pacific was still unbelievably brutal. And to end it, the United States made a decision that would change the world forever. They dropped 2 atomic bombs, first on Hiroshima, then on Nagasaki. And just days after that, on August 15th, Japan surrendered. The Second World War was finally over.
6 years. Think about that. From that first invasion of Poland in 1939 all the way to Japan's surrender in 1945. 6 incredibly brutal, world-changing years. And the sheer scale of it all is just hard to wrap your head around. I mean, this war was fought everywhere. In the frozen wastes of Russia, the scorching deserts of North Africa, and on tiny little islands in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. It was, without a doubt, the biggest and most widespread war the world has ever seen. You know, this conflict completely reshaped the world we live in today, which leaves us with a pretty big question, one that we're still grappling with. What lessons from all this are we still trying to learn today? It's a lot to think about. If you want to dive deeper into this period of history, make sure you subscribe to War Chronicles 1940. Thanks for joining me.